Hello, everyone, and welcome to Facebook Live with the Horticulturists. We are the Horticulturists here to answer your gardening questions, and we have another great special guest with us today for our special topic, which is going to be talking about apple trees in Illinois. So we're happy to answer any questions you might have about growing apples in Illinois or any other gardening questions that you have. You can start adding those into the comments. My name is Candace Hart. I'm the State Master Gardener Specialist in Illinois Extension, and I'm based here in Bloomington. And I love to answer questions about any type of flowers, annuals, perennials, cut flowers. That's my favorite topic to talk about. But luckily, we have some other great horticulturists who like to talk about other things. So, Kelly, I'll hand it over to you.
Hello, my name is Kelly Alsop, and I am a horticulture educator. I'm actually based out of Bloomington. Also, I serve Livingston, McLean, and Woodford counties. My horticulture expertise within the team is integrated pest management. I love talking about beneficial insects and pollinators, but I like talking about trees and vegetables. I like it all. And I just wanted to take just a moment to give a shout out to the Woodford County Master Gardeners. Instead of having a meeting, we all decided they would watch me on Facebook Live. I actually told them we'd be talking about holiday decor because I got my topics messed up, but I know they'll be happy to talk about apples because they like that topic also. So
Surprise.
If you're here, go ahead and say hi, and Candace will tell me hi, and welcome if you're here. So thank you for joining me.
Yeah, welcome Woodford County. That's really cool to hear some of your folks are tuning in. So I'm Ryan Vankoff, horticulture educator out of the neighboring unit to Kelly. So I cover Champaign, Fort Iroquois, and Vermilion counties. And my specialty or my background is in forestry, trees, woody plants, shrubs, all that kind of stuff is kind of my favorite corner of horticulture, but I'm also a big vegetable gardener. So that's probably my second love in horticulture is vegetable gardening and everything that goes along with that, growing your food at home. But with that, I'll hand it to our special guest for today. Bruce, you want to introduce yourself to folks?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bruce Black. I'm the horticulture educator for Carroll Lee and Whiteside County, based out of Sterling, but I'm coming from Dixon, Illinois today. And I'm also the horticulture educator for Boone, DeKalb, and Ogle. That was a recent addition to my job. So I'm happy to be serving both units in that capacity. And I'm coming to you guys from Northwest Illinois, where it's a little cold today after
Same
that
here.
rain we got.
Same here.
So no snow then, Bruce, just rain?
No snow, just rain. Had a close tornado in Carroll County. It was a funnel cloud, as last I heard, but interesting storm front that we had.
Yeah, about a 40-degree temperature difference yesterday was interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if you guys have questions about apple trees in particular or any kind of gardening questions, feel free to start adding them to the comments. But I think we're going to kick it off with Bruce just talking a little bit more about kind of overall apples in Illinois and maybe kind of some of the different varieties you grow. So if you see any varieties that you might grow, definitely let us know in the comments, or if you have other ones that you like to grow, add them in. But Bruce, take it away.
And Bruce didn't say his specialty, but I think you kind of get what his specialty is, but
fruits, of course. Yeah.
Yes. So I did realize that, Kelly, and my specialty is fruits and vegetables, as well as my, I guess, tertiary specialty is plant propagation. So if anybody has those questions as well, happy to help. And we'll go ahead and get started with our apples of Illinois. So first thing, starting off, I wanted to kind of start off with a little interesting fact about apples. And you guys might notice here that this apple, the seed is germinating in the middle. And so this is called vivipary, where the seed actually germinates inside the mother plant, throwing in that propagation knowledge. And this happens frequently in corn, tomatoes, apples, pears, and some citrus fruit, as well as peppers. And this is because of a hormonal breakdown in the fruit. So the seed contains a hormone, abscisic acid, which is supposed to prevent the seed from germinating until it gets into that perfect spot in the ground or in a transplant. But sometimes that goes a little wrong and the hormone breaks down faster. And so the seed actually starts germinating while it is in there. So any 80s fans of sci-fi movies might think of something popping out of a chest here, but that's kind of what's happening. The baby seed is growing inside of the mother plant. And so I just thought I would start off with something that people might be seeing. This was in a pink lady apple that I was having for lunch one day. And I had noticed it would been happening a lot more with some of the apples lately. So that breakdown just happens either by environmental or if the fruit is actually bitten by certain insects.
So Bruce, does this change anything about the apple? Does it taste different? Is it harder to store, or does it mean anything, or is it just interesting?
So it is not anything bad. It is one of those interesting things that happens with our fruits and our vegetables. But what it does change is this seed is growing in the fruit. And so you either need to transplant it immediately or discard it. So not many of us these days grow seedling apples just because seedling apple trees get to about 40 to 60 feet tall, depending on the variety. But this could still grow. It's a fun experiment to do if you have kids, to just put this in a wet paper towel or put it in the soil and see if it continues to grow and leaf out.
Very cool.
Yeah, very cool.
All right. And so let's talk a little bit about some varieties that we can grow here in Illinois. And I pulled this list from our website, and it's broken up into when the apples are harvested. So either summer, early fall, or fall apples, as well as we have some winter apples as well. So some that might pop out as tried and true varieties that have been grown for many years, Red Free, Empire, Jonathan, Golden Delicious. Most of the ones that are popular are going to be in this fall eating and cooking category. And those are the ones that people really look forward to all year long. I know myself, Cortland is the apple of choice for me for fall, along with Golden Delicious. But one of the things I'm going to ask you guys is, what is your favorite type of apple?
I'm a Honeycrisp girl. That's my favorite. I like it to be nice and crispy, not have that mealy texture, and a good amount of sweetness. That's usually my characteristics that I'm looking for.
Yeah. When Candace and I took horticulture with Dr. Skirvin at the University of Illinois, one of his classes was always an apple tasting lab. And so he'd allow us to taste. Candace, do you remember how many we tried?
Yeah, it was a lot.
It was like in the 50s.
Yeah.
And, I thought, I'd come up with a new one, but Honeycrisp was the one I chose out of the blind taste test. So I'm going to have to follow suit with Candace and pick Honeycrisp.
How about you?
Well, I hate to not have a different answer, but I think Honeycrisp is it tops my list, but I like the tart ones. So like a Granny Smith kind of apple is maybe number 2 for me. So I do like that tart, and they tend to be, at least in my experience, pretty crisp too, like a Honey Crisp. I don't know if that's a true characteristic that would carry through to those apples, but yeah. So but you can't beat that crispness of a Honey Crisp, and yeah, to me that's just been the tastiest I regularly get. So
nice. And we've gotten some comments here. We asked what some people's favorites are, and a couple people said Cortland is a favorite, a couple Gala, and a couple Honey Crisp too. So people are agreeing. That's good.
Well, I will, because you guys, at least Candace and Kelly, are University of Illinois grads. I'm an Iowa State grad, and we had a similar class in our fruit class with apple tasting. And the apple that I would absolutely eat, the only one the rest of my life, would be a Chieftain apple that was developed at Iowa State. It's hard to find in the trade these days, but it's been a variety that's been around for about 103 years. And it falls under that fall eating category. And it's got a sweet tart balance. So I just thought I'd put a shout out there for Iowa State.
Yeah, of course you would pick an Iowa State for Iowa.
Well, I've always said you can take the me out of Iowa, but you can't take the Iowa out of me.
Wow. Good luck with that.
You can take the apple out of Iowa, but you can't take that. Yeah, you can't take the Iowa out of the apple. Okay.
Yeah, I like to do that, a kind of a small version of that apple tasting with Master Gardener training whenever I teach that topic too, because it's just fun to do, because you don't label anything. You leave the names off and you let people kind of rank them just on the numbers. And it's always interesting to see what people they liked, but they didn't necessarily realize that they liked, or they thought they liked, but they end up not liking it. I think, Red Delicious fans, if you haven't tried some other varieties, definitely try some other varieties. That's always one of the lowest rated varieties whenever we do any taste test, but it's that like classic apple you see everywhere. But when you get to a taste test, there's so much more beyond that.
I do an apple tasting lab with the kids. When I was working with kids more, and the Red Delicious is the last two, and I always ask them what they think they'll like by the way the apple looks, and they all choose the Red Delicious. And then as far as taste, it's their least favorite.
But it's funny, if I think about over my lifetime, what apple have I ate the most of? I'd say it's probably Red Delicious. And I mean, it kind of made me not a huge fan of an apple coming out of childhood into adulthood until I really started to kind of taste different varieties and try others as an adult. I think was when I ever really even thought about eating much other than a nice red apple.
Right. Well, and you think about, so Bruce, like if we're talking about different varieties, what are some of the traits that, let's say, a grower would be looking for? Because obviously I think Red Delicious is so common, probably because it stores well and it ships well and it's a good looking apple, right? Like, what are some of the traits that really you should be looking for if you're looking to grow your own apple?
So that's a good question, because we tend to think about 3 or 4 main traits that people look for: taste, use, and then disease hardiness. And cold hardiness as well. So most folks tend to think about the taste and use first. But for me and for those in the industry, they're thinking about disease hardiness and cold hardiness first. Because some of these diseases with apples can severely wipe out a crop. So fire blight, bitter rot, all of these can cost you years that you've spent growing these trees to get them into production. So disease resistance is always number one, but then they always have to weigh the test or the taste. So everybody wants the Honeycrisp apple because of the taste and the texture, but Honeycrisp has some disease issues with it, and it's very hard to grow and it can be costly. But that's one of the things that everybody wants, so it's one to grow. And so Honeycrisp breeding is actually focusing on developing disease-resistant cultivars to introduce into the trade. So you still get that Honeycrisp apple, but it might slightly be different because of that genetic resistance to it.
That's probably why you see, like when you go to the grocery store, I tend to find Honeycrisp is typically one of the higher priced varieties that you're going to have, but that's because it's difficult to grow and it's not as easy as some of these other ones, right?
Yeah. So if the apple has more management inputs into it, they're going to have to increase the price on it to make the profit so that they can continue their operation. So
makes sense.
So Bruce, Illinois has a lot of apple tree growers, and I think if you grow up in the Midwest, that's what you do in the fall. You go to an apple orchard and they have just these immense amount of different kinds of apples. So why would somebody want to go to a grower in Illinois to buy apples versus buying them at the grocery store?
So that is also a great question, Kelly. And buying them local, you're going to get them fresh picked, usually the week that they are promoted for sale. And the apples that we get in the store could be from last year's harvest, where they've been stored all winter and then released to the grocery stores, or grown maybe in Washington or Oregon, and then shipped out across the nation. With those, they're actually harvesting them a little early. So they're not at that peak of sweetness because they want them to be able to withstand the shipping process. Whereas if we have local growers, they're out there this week. They might have spent Monday, Tuesday out there, and then Thursday, Friday, they have them for sale, taking Wednesday to wash and clean the apples and package them. Mm-hmm. So buying those local Illinois apples, you're guaranteeing the peak fresh apple.
Always good, yeah. Okay, we've got some questions coming in, Bruce. So let me scroll back up here. Deb asks, I had an apple tree blow down this summer. If I plant one this fall, will it pollinate? So I think she's kind of asking, if I plant one this fall, will it flower next season and be able to be pollinated?
So Deb, for this question, I would actually wait until the spring to put that apple tree in. If you plant it now, it's not going to have enough time to establish its root system before our winter, and it's not going to be able to acclimate before we get those cold temperatures. Depending on the size you purchase from the nursery or the garden center, you're going to have an establishment period of 2 years usually before that apple flowers. And that's simply because if we give it that 2 years to establish itself, then we have that 3 to 20-year period if it is taken care of properly to collect those apples all those years.
Yeah, so she's going to have at least probably a 2-year waiting period. And I think what a lot of people don't realize or don't think about is that the vast majority of apples don't self-pollinate. So if you plant an apple tree, you need another apple variety within a particular distance so that pollen can transfer from tree to tree. So even if let's say she had two and she lost one, a lot of times if a neighbor has a crabapple tree somewhere nearby, she would probably still be okay. I don't remember off the top of my head how far the pollen can travel, but I think it's a pretty good distance, if I remember right.
Usually about as far as a bee can travel.
Yeah, good, exactly, yeah. So keep that in mind, Deb. If you don't necessarily have another one of your own, there may be another apple nearby that could help you out until that replacement tree is mature.
Well, so Bruce, I've seen some nice little tables of what apple varieties cross-pollinate which apple varieties. Do you have any favorite references for those, or a place folks could go to kind of try and figure that out if they were going to plant several?
So usually the one that I go to most often is through the Cornell Fruit Lab. And if you just type in apple cross-pollination table and then Cornell, that'll pop up. And that is a good table because it includes so many varieties that are grown here in the United States. The one thing that I always do caution folks is if you're using a table that is outside of Illinois, double check, either do your research or contact your local extension office to make sure that that tree is going to be cold hardy enough to withstand our winters.
Yeah, good point.
And I have seen a lot of places where at the point of sale, on its tag or either on a website, there's usually kind of information that helps communicate what varieties would help cross-pollinate.
It does. And I was actually on a website yesterday looking up cherry varieties, and because my cherry trees didn't come in this year, so I'm looking to buy more. And on the description, it said best pollinators for these varieties.
Nice. I know a lot of those catalogs that you can get to will typically have their own charts and stuff in it too, so that's always helpful.
I have another question. I'm sorry, this is getting good. Bruce, what if I don't have room for multiple trees? What if I just have room for one apple tree? Are there types that self-pollinate, or I don't have to worry about the pollinators?
So
or is that not an option?
So there are a few varieties that are self-fruitful or self-pollinating, but all of the apple trees are going to do better with a companion plant. And so I'm actually glad you asked the space question, Kelly, because there are a type of apple trees that fit into the classification of either being called columnar or ballerina trees. And these are ones that can be grown in pots or containers. And these only need about 3 feet in width. So if you're somebody who really loves apples, or there are some others, pears and plums, that are in this category, you can have an apartment in the city and only have your patio or your deck, and you can grow 2 apple trees on there. And so these ballerina trees, they only get about 5 to 6 feet tall, only need about 3 feet in width, and they set fruit right along that main trunk. So they don't get as big and spread out as a regular apple tree. So that can also be an option for folks.
Ballerina trees, I like that name.
I do too.
Sounds really cool. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, awesome. Well, let me see. I think we got a couple other questions. Question here: how do I manage pest control on my apple tree / fruit without harming my honeybees? They said the apples look very damaged. So kind of a broad question there.
Right. So we'll start general on this and how to take care of your apple trees without harming your pollinators. The first thing is to always be out there looking and scouting. So every point throughout the summer, go in and just take a walk, take a look. Are you seeing any disease issues, or are you seeing insect holes on your tree? Taking care of things as you go. For anything that is recommended for application, you want to make sure to follow the label directions. So if it says that it can harm pollinators or bees, you want to apply them when the bees and the honey, the pollinators aren't active. And Kelly, I know that you have some information on this as well, on when to apply.
Yeah, I did an apple tree growing class with, we actually, in Woodford County, we have an orchardist that has been an orchardist for 40 years, and she became a master gardener. And technically I'm her mentor, but she's kind of my mentor because this lady is an encyclopedia on apples. So shout out to Shirley. And she's been helping me put together apple tree programs. And so we put together a chart about apple tree IPM. And I can have Erin share that with you. I will send that to her right away. But it's complicated what she does as an orchardist. I mean, she's, constantly looking out at the different stages of the apple tree. She's constantly looking for different types of insects, and some are more damaging than others. So I think that it's, I've commonly said that organic apple tree production is kind of a misnomer, because if you're going to have completely organic, you're not going to have pretty apples, right? Yeah. If you're going to have pretty apples, then you're going to have to, manage those pests. But, she's got a big orchard. She's got, lots of, potential pest issues. We may not have those types of issues. But I can share that with Erin to show you what she's looking for as the buds start to break and stuff.
But I think you do bring up a good point, Kelly, that organic apples are just something different. They're just something that's not quite as blemish-free and beautiful as an apple from the grocery store. And I've grown them organically on my property and just accepted the fact that, I don't know, like maybe 1 out of every 10 apples looks okay. And you can eat around the spots. You can make apple cider, applesauce. Like there's a lot of other uses. I think that's what I've kind of advised folks on in the past, is to maybe not worry about your apple quality. And if you're looking to grow them organically, just accept some of that damage. They still taste great.
Yeah, especially if you're going for yourself, you can tolerate whatever you want to on your own. Yeah.
And I'll just jump in here for a second. There are apple guides out there for those that are looking at growing organic apples. You can look up the OMRI, OMRI guides for apples. Those will be listing the products that you can use that are approved by the Organic Council for recommendation. And so, like Kelly and Ryan have said, it's going to be a little bit more of a challenge. You're going to be putting more of your maintenance into your cultural controls and your mechanical controls, like pruning, doing weed control. But one thing that's a little tricky for all diseases is that some of those that we see appear on the apple actually takes hold during the bloom time of the apple. So usually by the time you see the signs or the symptoms, it's a little too late to be treating for it. And so then, like Ryan said, just eat around it, cut it out, make sure to wash it really well.
And there are definitely schedules out there too. We talk about the pest management and the home landscape book frequently on this show, and that's kind of our Bible of of control options, but there is a whole schedule on there of, if you know apple scabs happening every year, here's when you're going to apply that fungicide or whatever you need to do to control it ahead of time. So if you are really serious about kind of controlling some of those things, then those schedules can definitely help.
So I think probably across the board, whether you're an organic grower or a home grower or anybody, there's probably something to be said for some disease resistance that's been bred into apples. Mm-hmm. Bruce, what kind of things can we expect out of a disease-resistant variety of apple? What are the things we've been able to overcome with breeding?
So that is a great question, Ryan, and I will pull up the slides here because different apple breeds or varieties are going to have different tolerances for how well they work in a disease or work against a disease. And so one of the ones that has been becoming more of an issue, and one that's not as talked about, is bitter rot. And this is a fungal disease that causes the fruit to rot during the summer while the apple is being produced. And this is one of those fungi that has worldwide distribution. So it's not just an issue here in Illinois or the United States, but around the world. But it's also more important in the southern parts of the state and the southern parts of the United States. And why this is an issue is because outbreaks can occur rapidly and can cause severe issues when we have prolonged warm, wet periods. And so this is just a couple of pictures from other universities that show what bitter rot looks like. So it starts off as these little lesions on here, and then they rapidly develop and expand into these really older, larger, fuzzier lesions that are covered then with the fungal pathogen and getting ready for the spores to be released. I will point out there's also some fly speck happening here, which is another issue. And to Ryan's question about resistance bred into the apple, you can see these are a number of common apple varieties that are grown in the Midwest. We've got Braeburn, Delicious, Fuji, Gala, and all of these have different tolerances. So the ones that have the HS are going to be highly susceptible, and you need to control for this as your spray schedule says. So if you notice during the periods of time at bud swell, fruit development, blossom, all of those will have different times where you have to follow the recommendations. And then the ones here that have the S are just susceptible, so not as bad, but still can get it. And then MR is going to be moderately resistant. So there's going to have some resistance in there. As you can see, currently, there's none that are completely resistant, but even a degree of resistance can help so that you don't have to apply as many pesticides or management strategies to relieve that disease pressure. So bitter rot is one that we see more in the southern part of the state, and one that we see a lot in the northern part of the state. And let me, having an issue with my slide here.
Yeah, it looks like you first start addressing bitter rot 10 days after petal fall. That's my chart.
I was like, Kelly, you became an expert on bitter rot.
No, I'm looking at my chart.
And to share with our audience, one of the places that I go to find out all these recommendations is the Midwest Fruit and Disease and Pest Guide that I will share with you guys. It's put out by Purdue, but it takes advice from local extension specialists in the Midwestern region to come together. Okay, this is how it affects, this is when it affects in our state, this is what seems to be manageable. And so you have those recommendations all combined into one reliable informational source. And so I will pull those up and send those to the chat box in a minute. But the one that we see the most in Northern Illinois, at least what I've seen over the past couple of years because of our weather favoring this bacteria, is fire blight. And this is as geeked out about a disease as I get, is fire blight, because it's a single-celled organism that turns a tree into looking like it was hit with a flamethrower. And it's just blows my mind sometimes every time I teach about this, where the tissue looks like it has been flamed or charred. In some cases, you will see what are called shepherd's hooks on the edge of the branch. And pears are very susceptible to this bacterium. And apple trees do have some resistance bred into them based on your cultivar that you select. Problem that most people think is, okay, I've got this issue, it's got to be a fungus. Fungicides are not going to help in this case. You're going to need some dormant sprays of a Bordeaux mixture or a copper spray to help kill the bacterium. And this is, again, one of those bacteriums that starts out during the flowering process. And so you have to start spraying your apple trees if it is susceptible during that flowering period. And I didn't put my chart in this one.
It's quite the pathogen too, because I mean, it's a problem on a lot of landscape plants. I mean, I've seen a lot of pears are very susceptible. I've seen a lot of pears in the last couple of years die of this disease. And you know, it's I guess one way that I've handled it in the ornamental setting, you know, with crab apples and other things, is with pruning. So that's a way. That's another part of probably your control method. But if you catch it early enough, some of this stuff can be pruned out. Is that your experience too, Bruce?
Yes, I completely agree with you, Ryan. And when you are pruning an apple tree that does have fire blight, it is a good recommendation to wipe your pruners or your loppers off with an alcohol solution between cuts. Because if you're cutting an area that might have that bacterium, every other cut, if you don't clean, is going to introduce that bacterium across all of your tree or all of your backyard orchard. So you can prune these out. I always say if you start seeing some of the symptoms, prune back a little further because you don't want it to be in that tissue. And that helps cut that out. And I was super excited when I bought my new house last year that I had an apple tree that was ready, established, and upon inspection of the backyard, I found that last year's fire blight just killed the tree because the owners weren't here to manage the tree. So it was probably a fire blight infection that had been at least 2 years, maybe 3, because it got all the way down into the trunk and it started to crack and split that trunk tissue. So in that case, cut it down, use it in a fire pit, put it in your yard waste, but I would not use it in a smoker. So it's always one of those recommendations. What do I do? I have this apple tree, I have to cut it down. You can use the healthy wood in your smoker, but if you're taking the apple down for a disease issue, I would recommend not putting it in where you're going to smoke your meats.
Oh, good to know. Okay, I'm going to scroll back up here because I think we've gotten some other questions in the meantime. Let's see. So kind of on the same line, question about what do you spray Golden Delicious with to prevent fungal diseases and worm infestation? So basically, does it kind of go back to that spray schedule of kind of covering all your bases if that's what you're looking to do?
Yeah, so I wouldn't recommend just going out and spraying your trees on an annual basis without knowing exactly what diseases your tree is susceptible for and what issues it's had in the past. Because you want to take care of the pollinators, as well as you want to make sure that by just spraying blanket applications of fungicides, you're not building up resistance in your outdoor fungal communities.
Mm-hmm. Very good. So first step, kind of ID which particular fungal infections she has and what particular insect infestation, and then go from there.
And here is the guide for the chat box for the Midwest Fruit Pest Management Guide.
Great, we'll get that posted. Let's see. A follow-up question to the favorite apple varieties. Fritz said ABRD, anything but Red Delicious. I like that. That's a good way to go with it. And two follow-up questions talking about the ballerina trees. Anna asked, would you then have to take the ballerina apple trees indoors in the winter if they were potted?
All right, so good question. With the ballerina trees, we're not going to have that geothermal heat to keep them warm that we would with an apple tree that's planted in the ground. So it would be recommended to either take that into a unheated garage or an unheated shed, or you can wrap the pot itself in some insulation. People have used blankets, the floating row covers that we use on our cucurbits. They make a floating row cover type material that is used for insulation for our fruit crops, or you can pile up straw around there.
And you're really looking to insulate the root zone, right?
Yes.
So that the root ball doesn't get killed off.
Yep. So you're just looking at insulating the pot rather than the tree, because the tree is still going to need that chilling hours requirement that we have for our fruit crops. And I think that's one of the things that as people are moving towards more container fruits, we have to keep in mind, because most of our fruit crops are going to need between 500 and 1600 hours of cold temperatures between 32 degrees and 45 degrees. And so even though I'm complaining today about being cold, I'm excited because last night we had those cold hours to start that chilling requirement for our fruit crops for next year.
Okay, very good. And then another one on that, Jen asked, so the ballerina trees could also be grown under power lines. It'd be a good size for that then, right?
Yes, because they're going to get no taller than you are. So if you are I guess I shouldn't say that, because the top height is going to be about 8 to 9 feet for some apple varieties. So might still be working a little bit over your head, but most of those varieties are going to be between 6 to 8 feet tall.
Very good. Yeah, and that's always kind of the idea with dwarf apple trees is we're trying to grow them at a size where it's manageable, where we're able to deal with pest and disease problems. We're able to harvest and prune a lot easier than planting, like you said earlier, a seedling apple tree, which is going to be 40, 50 feet tall at full maturity. So those are definitely good options.
Yes, and one of the things that I was thinking about when I first started in fruit class was I have a fear of heights. Well, not so much a fear of heights, but a fear of falling. And I picked a specialty where I might have to get up and climb a tree. And I'm not one to get more than a couple of feet off the ground. So I'm glad that we have our dwarfing and semi-dwarfing apples and fruit trees.
Most definitely. Super helpful. Okay, let's see. We got another question here. Juan asks, is there a fungicide product for apple trees that can be applied in the root of the tree diluted with water? So like a soil drench, it sounds like. He said, I remember getting one a few years ago, but they stopped selling it for some reason. So any soil drench fungicide products for apple trees, it sounds like.
Off the top of my head, I'm not remembering a soil drench that's available. And with the drenches and the variety names for different products, they are going through that constant regulation and EPA cycle. So if it isn't one that's currently available, it might have changed its use. And I will look in our the Midwest Pest Guide to see if there's a soil drench variety available.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. That'd be a good place to look. If there is anything labeled for apple trees, it'll be in there. Very good. Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely a great way to avoid spraying some foliage, but I guess I know with some soil drain particular products, there is an issue of leaching through the soil profile, toxicity to other things. So, I mean, that's something to maybe consider in all this too before you apply a product like that. Are you close to a stream? Is there an issue that this could escape your site?
And as I'm going through the guide here, the soil drenches that are currently listed as recommendations are for apple and for raspberry and blackberry, excuse me. So there's not one currently listed for apples.
Okay, that would be why they can't find it then. Okay, I think we've caught up on questions. So keep adding those to the comments. If you have any other great fruit tree questions or any other gardening questions, we're happy to get them in the last 10 minutes. So Bruce, what else do you think would be important for folks to know about growing apples in Illinois? Any other areas you think we haven't hit on yet?
Well, let me think here a moment.
Kelly and Ryan, any
Pruning?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
I think pruning is a common question I get a lot, and I think a lot of people just don't ever prune their apple tree.
Okay, here you go, Bruce. Here's my question. I have a 25-year-old neglected apple tree. I've never pruned it before. What do I do?
So with an apple tree that is that old and hasn't been pruned for a while, I'm going to probably advise you, based on the age of the tree, that there's not a whole lot of pruning that can be done with that tree to keep it productive. It's 25 years old. It's getting towards the end of its production life. So you can do some light pruning to bring it back, doing some outer cuts, removing some of the older wood, In situations where we have trees, and not only trees, but fruit crops as a whole that haven't been pruned or taken care of, you never want to remove more than a third a year. Because if you remove more than a third of the wood or the plant material that year, you're risking it not surviving the winter, because it's going to take that energy that it would put towards surviving the winter and that energy storage into redeveloping and growing. So what I would recommend is do some light pruning. For the basics of pruning, there are 3 types of cuts that we're really going to do. A pinching cut that's going to remove the growing tips from the shoots. Some thinning cuts where we are removing branches back to a main branch. Or we're going to do a heading back cut where we are shortening branches back to a good bud. So to make a little more sense of this, if I'm going to be removing a disease portion of a tree, so if I see some fire blight on an apple tree, depending on how severe that infection is, if it's just the tips of the tree that I'm noticing, I'm only going to either do a pinching cut or I'm going to do a heading back cut where I cut back to that good bud. Now, in this case, we want to make sure that we can see here that we've got some injury forming at this branch site. So we would actually take this back further to about here rather than just right there. If we're trying to open up our canopy of our plant to get more airflow through there to help reduce moisture, get sun to the center, we're going to do some more thinning cuts and really opening up that canopy. One thing I will tell people to keep an eye on is to avoid bark inclusions. So with bark inclusions, we have 2 parts of the main trunk that have grown together. And in this crevice here, it's going to be a place where bacterial and fungal spores can really grow and develop because it's going to be dark, wet, and moist. Or dark and wet. Wet and moist are the same thing. But what happens is in this inclusion is it really starts to take a toll on the tree. And this is what can happen when that site gets really weak and starts to break apart. So you're going to have part of that tree that just falls off. So a windstorm, ice storm, too much snowfall, putting weight on there, that's going to break that off. And I like this photo here because there's a car right behind that tree. It's right along their driveway. Luckily, this tree decided to fall in the opposite direction and break in that direction rather than breaking and falling on the car. So in some of these cases, you gotta look at the plant in its location. And then other things that I would just take out if we're doing an older tree, look for storm damage. Prune that out so that you don't have falling debris or the potential for breaking like this tree here is. Now, with some of our apple trees, if we are doing more of the dwarf or semi-dwarf varieties, those only usually get between 8 and 15 feet tall. So not a lot of canopy going to be happening over our head. But when we get into some of those trees that aren't as dwarfing, we want to really worry about that canopy over our heads. So Kelly, did I answer your question?
Yeah, one of the things that blew my mind when I first started learning about apple tree pruning was we did the opposite of what we do for ornamental tree pruning. In an ornamental tree, I would never, ever in a million years take out the central leader. But in an apple tree, once it reaches to a certain height, you clip out that central leader. And so that was quite interesting to me. And another thing that I, as a novice, learned about apple tree pruning, that apple tree shaping was almost just as important as pruning. And so we use a lot of spreaders and weights to get those branches to become more horizontal than vertical. And so that's been, what I think is the two main challenges for apple tree pruning and understanding it. And then, I always break the 30% rule because, it's just like, it's neglected apple trees. I think that's the problem, is that you need to train them from the very beginning, and rather than, come in and not prune them when they're, not prune them in their first 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what I was just going to comment too, is like, this is much easier when it's a newly planted young tree. Your question about a 25-year-old unmanaged apple tree, my answer first off would be, does it have sentimental value? Do you really want to keep that tree? Because if a chainsaw and removing it is an option, and starting over, that may be your better option, to be honest, unless that tree really holds a special value and you're really wanting to keep it. Sometimes starting fresh is a much easier task than trying to take it back 25 years.
I think a common problem with like a newly planted apple tree is that folks plant it and they don't want to prune anything for the first 3 or 4 years. And it man, it's some of that early pruning that can really set the stage for that canopy structure that you want. So it is important to be pruning pretty regularly.
And Candace, if it is a sentimental tree, you can still cut it down and then you can propagate it into a new tree. So take some healthy shoots off that big old tree, graft them to a dwarfing rootstock, and then you have a smaller version of a neglected tree.
Yep, that's what I would do.
But isn't that the point of apple trees? You don't get sentimental with them. They're not going to last more than 20 years before there's all these new hybrids, that varieties, whatever you guys call them, all these new varieties that have this disease resistance, that have this better taste, that grow shorter, that is easier for the homeowner. So to want to, I understand the draw of like heirloom tomatoes, but I don't understand the draw of heirloom apple trees. I feel like they're already can be difficult to grow, managing pests and diseases. So why wouldn't you want the newest, latest, greatest?
Yeah. And why make it harder if you don't have to?
And this comes back to variety selection. So there are hundreds upon thousands of different apple varieties out there, but sometimes you just can't beat the choice of a variety that maybe you grew up on as a child and it's no longer available at your local grocery store. The grocery store is going to have the popular apples or the ones that most people are requesting. If you have an apple like Enterprise, I've never seen an Enterprise apple in the grocery store, even though it's a delicious apple. And I know we're running short on time, but there are also new varieties of apples like Kelly suggested, and there is now a genetically engineered apple that does not brown. It's called the Arctic apple. So that one will be coming out more. And I was talking with an educator yesterday. We were doing a presentation, and it's available in Chicago. So those folks in Chicago might be seeing it in their grocery stores. It's pre-cut, pre-packaged, and It's already in a bag, just grab and go.
Very cool. Okay, we're going to finish up with one last question that came through. I have an old apple tree that bears fruit every other year. Possible reasons not to bear fruit every year. So give them some final tips on preventing that biennial bearing that happens.
So biennial bearing happens when an apple tree is not pruned regularly. It bears too much fruit during one growing year, and the load of apples is too great that it puts all of its energy into it that year, takes the next year off, and then it will go back into producing a large crop load that next year. So some strategies: pruning, going through during the flowering stage and doing some apple thinning of the flowers, going through June for June drop, taking more apples off to make that load more manageable, and that should get that back into a every year bearing.
Very good. Awesome. Well, thank you, Bruce. We appreciate your fruit expertise today. We had a lot of great questions. We pretty much stayed on fruit all day, which is unusual. Usually we get some other topics too. So that was great. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Our next show is going to be December 2nd. So we're skipping a little longer than usual for Thanksgiving. And then we'll be back on full on holiday mode. As you can see, I'm already there. But our December 2nd episode is going to focus on holiday decor. So Kelly and I and Brian, we're going to talk all about evergreens and wreaths and garlands and all the fun stuff you can do with your garden materials for holiday decor. So we hope you'll join us. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the day. Bye.